Like the deck, there's a specific sequence that should be followed when building a set of Zuri stairs. Keep in mind that the detail involved will typically take longer than a conventional set of deck stairs. The sequence is as follows. First, the stringers. As with the deck, we recommend using treated lumber for this, and they must be spaced at 12 inches on center. Additional blocking. This is needed to support the deck boards in conjunction with the perimeter trim. The fascia and the first riser. These should be secured using Cortex screws and plugs. Then, starting at the bottom step and working to the top, install the perimeter trim, deck boards, then the next riser, and so on. Here's Dave Ripley to take you through the process.
All right, what we're doing is laying out the skirt boards to cut them with miters to receive the risers. In this case, it was 7-inch rise, 12-inch step. So I'm going to lay that out and step it off. 7, 12. On this last one, because you have to factor in the thickness of the material, the deck material, it's 6-inch rise. So what I'm going to do here is just cut the bottom and the top, just to make, before I cut anything here, and size it up to the stringer to make sure everything's the same. Now we fit our stringer at the top and bottom. Now we just trace the step and the riser on each one. And on the riser, that mark will be the short point of the 45. Take a small handsaw, finish the cut. So now we've made our stringer. And I'll put more Cortex on as we go, but I like to keep the miters loose in case we have to tweak them at all. So we're installing the blocking on the inside of the stringers. You don't have to do this for normal decking boards, but with Zuri, because of the trim cap, you need something for the deck board to support, to be supported by. Any scrap will do. You don't have to cut another whole stringer. That's it. Now we're going to measure the trims for the stairs. We'll typically check them all, and the one with the greatest length is what we'll make them all to. You're not going to see any kind of gap underneath here, so that way you have a good consistent set of stairs. So I'm going to cut our side pieces just to a rough length. Now we're going to cut our miter returns first. So for our right side, the trim cap overhangs by 1 inch. So what I'll typically do is mark 1 1/8 inches, just to give it a little bit of play in case it has to come out. And this is my test piece. So now there's a stop on our miter saw. So we're going to set that stop so it stops us right at 1 1/8 inches. Now our returns are cut. Now to make my life easy, when we cut this out, square up from that. Same thing, we build it out because of the blade rotation. I've flipped up my stop. There's your return. And now we've made our left and right miter returns. Now we have to cut them to length. Those are our return pieces. Now we'll cut our front nosing and glue them up. Okay, now we're going to slot the board with the biscuit cutter for the ebb tie to slide into. We cut it at each joist. The ebb tie sits right in. Okay, we've set up the biscuit cutter So the ebb tie, the bottom tabs finish perfectly even with the bottom of the deck board. Now we're ready to glue. Zuri has a pretty unique gluing process. For the steps, it's easiest to have a bench set up, somewhere where you can have a little more control of gluing those miters. We like to put heavy OD or any other PVC glue. We like the heavy duty. It's just got a thicker viscosity. On a hot day, it's not going to run out of the joint before it has time to set up. And with that, we use 2P10. What the 2P10 does is acts as a clamp while the PVC glue has time to make a chemical bond. Spray one side with the activator. We take the PVC glue, put a nice bead on the bottom 2/3. And then we take the 2P10 and you just put a thin bead around the top, down a bit so it doesn't ooze out on you and make a mess. And you have just a few seconds to get that right, and it's going to grab. And that's going to hold that miter until it, again, is a chemical bond and won't break. That's our first thread. You want to put those aside, let the PVC glue really bond, and move on to something else. All right, now that we have the skirts on, we put our bottom riser on. Just going to glue that joint as well. Okay. Now we're ready to apply our trim. The trim's been sitting, drying and getting solid. We'll just take any trim saw, and that's really the only cut right there that is going to show. Everything else is going to be hidden. Like that. Now the return is going to cover that, so this does not have to be a pretty cut. We just take the chisel, line it up, take the chunk out. Take the chisel, line it up with the back edge, knock that little chunk out. Little extra is fine. The return hides it all. Now we're ready to install. Okay. Now we'll take our ebb ties, and on those inside, because they're hitting the trim, you can't get the full ebb tie in. So I'll just take a pair of snips and cut a 1/4 inch off. Place them in. Now, with some ebb ties, you put the screw straight down in. Not with Zuri. you want to go angle down through into the substrate of the deck. It's going to help restrict the movement. And coat the ends. Line up your biscuits. Now on this, because the riser's on it, you'll face screw and that's going to hold it in. Now all we have left is to fill in our miter returns. And we're done. Now I'll cut the return miter off of a full piece of trim. I'll measure back from the long point, the measurement I had from the stringer out to the long point. That's our return. Dry fit these, make sure they work. Again, little PVC glue, little 2P10. That's how we do Zuri steps.